The password reset email arrived at 10:14 a.m. It was routine. Automated. Just a quiet prompt for a shared family cloud drive I hadn't logged into since my mother set it up 10 years ago. I clicked the link. Not out of curiosity. Out of habit. I always answered the prompts. I always cleared the queue. It's what reliable people do. I opened the drive. Navigated past scanned tax forms, digital photo albums, and neatly labeled receipt folders. Then I found it. A single directory titled household_allocation_2014-2024. Inside was one spreadsheet. I clicked it. It loaded instantly. Rows of dates. Clean columns. Income. Transfers. Emergency reserves. Family priorities. I scrolled. My breath didn't catch. My pulse didn't race. I just watched the numbers align. There, in the first row, was my name. Labeled, primary funding source. I scrolled down. My birthdays. My promotion. The week I spent in the clinic with stress-induced arrhythmia. Each one tagged in a separate column, low priority, defer. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I simply closed the laptop. I turned my chair and stared at the wall fan as it rotated, steady and unbothered. And I felt something quietly snap into place. They called it family support. I was beginning to recognize it as infrastructure theft. Have you ever been the silent foundation of a house that forgot your name? Drop a comment. Just tell me where you are. I want to know I'm not the only one who learned too late that visibility wasn't required for the weight to still be felt. I kept my hands flat on the desk. Not to show control. To stop them from shaking. I had spent 10 years mistaking their silence for trust. Now I saw it for what it was, an assumption. An assumption that my stability was infinite. That my needs were flexible. That my presence was a utility, not a relationship. I leaned back. I let the quiet settle. And I stopped wondering why I had always been the one who stayed. I started wondering what would happen if I finally left. It didn't start with a single transfer. It started with rhythm. Over 10 years, my family's life became a series of carefully managed cycles that always ended at my bank account. Julian's role was the vision. The startups that never launched. The temporary gaps between networking events. The polished Instagram posts about grind mode and future momentum. Relatives praised his ambition. My parents called it potential. My role was the floor that kept him from hitting the ground. I covered the rent when the phase shifted. I bailed out credit lines he called bridge loans. I missed my own career milestones because someone always needed to handle the logistics. I absorbed every crisis as my default setting. The framing was always the same. My mother would say, Clara has the stability. My father would add, Julian is just getting started. And they would always finish with the line that became our family motto, family doesn't keep score. I believed it for years. I thought balance was something that corrected itself. That if I just stayed steady long enough, the ledger would eventually clear. But ledgers don't clear when one side is designed to drain and the other is designed to hold. I kept proof, not out of suspicion, but out of professional habit. A shoebox of declined personal credit applications I couldn't afford to process while covering their emergencies. A wall calendar marked with family emergency in red ink. Every single weekend for 3 years. Worn nursing gloves from when I stepped in to care for my mother while Julian was closing a deal in another state. Bank statements showing my savings dip like clockwork every time his next chapter began. I didn't look at them and feel betrayed. I looked at them and felt recognized. The math was finally catching up to the exhaustion. The withdrawals weren't accidents. They were expectations. At 28, I sat in my car outside the office after being passed over for a promotion. The reason? I couldn't guarantee weekend availability. I couldn't take the calls. I couldn't disappear when the family needed its foundation. My phone buzzed. Julian's text, "Thanks for the bridge loan. You're a lifesaver. I'll sort this out soon." I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I never heard the follow-up. I never heard the update. I just sent the money. Again. And again, I wasn't a sister. I was a revolving account with a pulse. I learned to treat my own needs like background noise. I logged every withdrawal. I balanced every compromise. I waited for the day they would finally see the cost. But erosion doesn't happen all at once. It happens in small, justified withdrawals. In quiet sacrifices that slowly erase the person making them. Love shouldn't be measured in liquidity. And worth shouldn't be measured in availability. I thought I was building a home. I was just funding an escape route I was never allowed to take. And the quietest part wasn't the money. It was watching myself disappear, one transfer at a time, while they celebrated the life I was quietly paying for. The breaking point didn't come with screaming. It came with a beep. I was sitting in an examination room at the outpatient cardiology clinic, waiting for the results of a stress-induced screening. Mild arrhythmia. Elevated cortisol markers. The doctor spoke in careful, measured tones. "You need rest," he said. "Boundary review. Stress reduction. Your nervous system has been running on emergency protocol for too long." I nodded. I was used to nodding. Used to absorbing instructions and carrying them home like groceries. My phone buzzed against the paper-covered table. I glanced down. The family group chat. Julian's message lit up the screen, "So glad you're okay. We're at the launch event. Mom's toasting. Tell the doc we're all proud." The nurse stepped back into the room, her tablet speaker left on by accident. For 3 seconds, the room filled with the sounds I hadn't heard in years. Laughter. Glasses clinking. The low hum of a crowded event space. And then, a voice I recognized as my father's, slightly muffled by distance, wouldn't have happened without Clara's quiet support. The nurse quickly muted it, apologizing, but the damage was already done. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel the familiar knot of resentment tighten in my chest. I felt something quieter. Something colder. Recognition. The spreadsheet hadn't just been tracking money. It was tracking my absence. My needs were marked defer not because they were unimportant, but because my presence was assumed to be infinite. They didn't just want my resources. They wanted my silence. And I had spent years mistaking compliance for love. I didn't cry. I didn't pack my bag and storm out. I simply asked the nurse for a copy of the receipt. I thanked the doctor. I walked to my car with the same steady pace I'd used for 10 years. But something had shifted. The exhaustion that had lived in my bones for a decade finally had a name. I drove home. I didn't go to bed. I went to my desk. I opened my laptop. I created a new folder. I named it, my_life_itemized. I wasn't building a weapon. I was building a mirror. And mirrors don't negotiate. I sat there as the screen glowed, feeling the weight of a decade lift off my shoulders. Not because I had fixed it. But because I had finally stopped pretending it was my job to carry. The grief had passed. The documentation had begun. And with it, the quiet architecture of my exit. I didn't react. I audited. I logged into my banking portal and downloaded a decade of statements. I printed them. I laid them out on the dining table and cross-referenced every line against the family spreadsheet. I highlighted the transfers in yellow. The emergencies in red. The milestones I'd missed in gray. Then I opened a blank document and built a parallel ledger. Column 1, my costs. Column 2, my deferred goals. Column 3, my health markers. Column 4, the emotional toll I'd stopped naming. I didn't do it to punish anyone. I did it to see the full picture. I wasn't building a weapon. I was building a mirror. And mirrors don't negotiate. The next morning, I called a financial advisor I'd trusted for years. I didn't lead with exhaustion. I led with data. I'm restructuring, I told him. I need clean separation protocols. No joint accounts. No automatic transfers. Just a clear line. He didn't ask why. He just started the paperwork. Later that week, I sat with my therapist. She looked at me over her notes and asked the question I'd been avoiding. What are you going to do? I didn't hesitate. I'm going to stop being the default. It was the first time in years I let silence sit without rushing to fill it. I realized then that I had spent a decade waiting for them to acknowledge me. Now I was documenting myself. And numbers don't need witnesses. I opened a new message to Julian. I typed, I've reviewed the family allocations. I'm stepping back. I deleted it. I typed another, you need to start managing your own phases. I deleted that too. Words had never worked between us. They only gave them more room to deflect, to reframe, to turn my boundary into my betrayal. So I closed the app. I locked my laptop. I turned off the overhead lights and sat in the quiet. I didn't send anything. I didn't demand an apology. I waited. I restructured. I prepared. Because I finally understood something I had never allowed myself to believe. Silence isn't surrender. It's a boundary. And boundaries don't need an audience to hold. They just need you to stop negotiating with your own worth. The meeting took place at a neutral cafe on the edge of town. I arrived 10 minutes early. Ordered black coffee. Sat in the corner booth where I could watch the door. Julian walked in right on time. He carried a leather portfolio, the kind that signals readiness, but I recognized the posture. It was the same stance he used before asking for a loan. He sat down, opened the folder, and began speaking in confident, rehearsed tones. He talked about scaling. About momentum. About how this next phase required family alignment and a consolidated push. He didn't ask for money. He assumed it. He assumed I would nod, calculate the logistics, and absorb the risk like I always had. I let him finish. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct him. When the silence finally settled, I didn't reach for my wallet. I reached for the envelope in my bag. I slid a single printed sheet across the table. No fanfare. No raised voice. Just paper. It wasn't an accusation. It was a comparison. My ledger beside his projections. My deferred milestones beside his temporary gaps. My documented health markers beside his launch dates. The numbers sat side by side. Clean. Unavoidable. I didn't need to explain them. The math spoke for itself. I tapped one line from my notes, the one I'd written after the clinic visit. I have been the foundation. Foundations don't get to be seen. They just get to hold the weight. Julian scanned the page. His confidence didn't break. It pivoted. That's just day-to-day, he said, waving a hand. You handled the logistics. I handled the big picture. I met his eyes. I kept my voice level. The big picture is made of small days. And you missed 4,000 of them. The cafe noise faded into the background. He shifted in his seat. I didn't press. I just let the words sit. You called it family. I'm calling it what it was, a one-way transfer disguised as loyalty. I didn't wait for a rebuttal. I gathered my things. I left the sheet on the table. The confrontation wasn't loud. It was documented. The truth doesn't need volume to be heard. It just needs a quiet person who finally stops looking away. The collapse didn't happen with shouting. It happened with structure. Julian's next bridge loan stalled when the usual routing number simply stopped working. My parents tried the old playbook, guilt first, then panic, then performative tears. Texts went out to extended family members I hadn't spoken to in years. Clara's changed. She's being cruel. Family isn't supposed to be like this. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I didn't join the narrative they were trying to build. I just closed the joint accounts. I redirected the auto transfers to my own name. I updated every beneficiary form, every digital password, every shared login. I stepped into my own life without fanfare. No announcement. No victory lap. Just quiet recalibration. A week later, a message arrived from a former colleague. Someone who had watched from the sidelines years ago, who had seen the late-night emails and the missed promotions. I saw the shift. We always knew who really carried it. I didn't reply with gratitude or relief. I just saved it. It wasn't validation I needed. It was confirmation that the pattern had been visible all along. I finally understood something I had spent years avoiding. I wasn't taking anything from Julian. I was reclaiming what was never his to claim. I was just finally charging rent on my own existence. 1 year later, I was sitting at my kitchen table when I scrolled past Julian's latest post. Starting fresh. New chapter. Below it, my parents' carefully curated caption, family first, always. I didn't pause. I didn't screenshot. I didn't feel the familiar guilt tighten my chest. I just scrolled. Their chaos was no longer my emergency. Their collapse was no longer my crisis. Recognition doesn't come from being loud. It comes from being undeniable. Peace isn't the absence of conflict. It's the presence of boundaries that hold without you having to guard them. I had spent a decade building a foundation for a house that forgot my name. Now, I was finally living in my own. And for the first time, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like ownership. I used to think being the reliable one meant being the invisible one. I thought if I just carried the weight quietly enough, they would eventually acknowledge the cost. I believed that endurance was the currency of love. Now I know better. Reliability without reciprocity is just exploitation with a softer name. Love shouldn't require you to disappear so someone else can take the credit. Your labor isn't less valuable because it happened in the dark. And you don't need permission to own what you've already built. I sat at my kitchen table that evening and closed the ledger. Not with anger. Not with triumph. With closure. The numbers were balanced. The account was settled. I opened my laptop and booked a solo retreat for the following week. No itinerary. No obligations. Not to prove I had survived, or to run away. Just to finally rest. To exist without being a resource. To breathe without calculating who needed me next. The fan turned. The coffee cooled. And for the first time in 10 years, the silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like space. What's one thing you've funded that was never credited, but still changed everything? Write it down. Keep it close. The rest will quietly follow you. The day I stopped begging for credit was the day I finally gave it to myself. What's one line you're ready to draw today?